2 years ago, I said to myself, I'm going to start going out. I'm going to start having a good time again. I'm going to start dating. And I would say I opened up a tremendous amount of can of worms by doing that. And very quickly I realized your boy's got some work to do and on himself. And there's no way I'm going to be a good partner to anybody, myself included, if I don't deep dive on some of this. So I went to traditional therapy. I worked with our boy Nick Pags a little bit. I went back to normal therapy, right? And so that's been a part of my toolkit now. The journaling has always been a foundation, right? Putting pen to paper, my thoughts down, getting really clear as to and my journaling prompts are pretty funny. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but they start with me venting about what's going on. I work through it. And by the end of it, I'm hyping myself up. And that's every time that I journal. It's like, what's going on? What's wrong? Whatever. From there, I work through it. And then by the end, I'm like, you got this. You're totally fine. You're a badass. And so, I think the journaling with meditation, therapy, I now have an arsenal of things that I can call on when I know I'm feeling some type of way. And I just have to be disciplined enough to call myself on my bullshit and go do the work that I know I need to do.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. We are making it through summer. The guests just keep getting more and more incredible, and I am just so thankful for everybody's participation, feedback. If you haven't already, please be sure to drop a review. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your show notes from. Also, don't forget, there's a discount code in the show notes if you want to pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I am talking a little fast today, but that's because I am super excited about today's guest. Today's guest is Sam Tooley. He's a fitness trainer and co-founder, CEO of Alpha Fit Club. If you're in Jersey, I know you've heard of him. It's a rapidly growing franchise group fitness concept that focuses on circuit-style classes that blend total body strength training and high-intensity cardio intervals. Sam is 31. He's a competitive endurance athlete with a dynamic social following he's built over the years. He's had partnerships with brands like Ladder, the virtual personal training app, and is a co-founder and CEO of the Garage Gym, a 24/7 members-only training facility in Westfield, New Jersey. Sam, thank you for joining me.
No, I appreciate it, dude. Quite the intro, quite the hype. I even like the little countdown as we come in. So I'm ready to go, man.
Of course, bro. Got to get you ready. Got to get you hyped. So I've known you, for a couple of years now. I think our deepest interaction personally was when you were facilitating the Local Run Club for a little bit. And that's when I got to know you as a coach. And one thing I picked up on right away is I know you had taken on that task despite the fact that you had a lot on your plate at the time, but you were all in. And that really kind of stood out to me. You weren't half in, half out. And, as a runner myself who, was really leaning on your guidance to kind of take myself to the next level, I said to myself, I got to keep an eye on this guy. He's doing something different. And so from there, I got to learn a little bit more about you. And to the listeners out there, this isn't the first time that I've referenced Joe Rinaldi's podcast, Project Endure. We recently had Josh Holy on, who was also on Project Endure. And Joe does a really, really good job of, talking to guests such as yourself and highlighting your stories. And that's when I learned a little bit more about who you were and what you had gone through to get to where you are today. And so I want to give the Mile 40 audience a little bit of a sneak peek into that, because then when they hear that, they'll understand, how your bio came to be what it is. So give us a little bit of quick background. First of all, where you grew up, a little bit about childhood for you.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to start with the fact that Wallaco Run Club is an incredible blast from the past, because I think sometimes when you chip away and you do a whole bunch of stuff, you can forget about certain things. And quite frankly, I haven't even thought about Wallaco Run Club in a long time. But to your point, that was special. That was during the pandemic, right? That was when I think people needed a sense of connection, a sense of community. And I was all in because I needed that myself, right? And so that was an outlet for me to really just connect with people when I needed it most. So thank you for bringing that back. And Joe is a friend from high school. We had a podcast prior to Project Endure together called the Pursuit of Progress. And we had 2 seasons of that, right? We did 50 episodes right around the same time of Wallaco Run Club. So just a nice flashback for me to start it. But before that, grew up in Westfield, New Jersey. So I'm still in my hometown at 31 years old. I've yet to fly the coop. Came back here after college, and really just found a sense of belonging here. And I honestly didn't really feel like that when I was in high school or growing up here. It was a great place. Obviously a beautiful town and just a great place to grow up. But I always felt like I wanted to go explore and do something different. And so high school for me was pretty simple, right? Outside looking in, was a state champion and school record holder for the track team. Westfield Track and Field is probably the most historic public school in the state of New Jersey for track and field. Much of that had to do with the coach that I had at the time. He was a very militant, Yoda-like guy, definitely a hard ass, but knew how to connect with different kids. So for me, I needed that tough love. I needed that push. I needed to be treated like an athlete at the end of the day. I played every sport under the sun, but the only thing I was really good at was running. And then he knew how to connect with other kids who needed a little bit more of that gentle touch and really just like that hand holding and whatnot, but still were savages in their own right when it came to the track. So I learned a lot from him. And I think I was impacted in a way that when I came back home, after, quite frankly, was a really rough period of time. So I lost that outlet of track. I lost the outlet of running in college and definitely kind of swerved off into a much deeper, darker place and really just wasn't the best version of myself. My new outlet became drinking and doing drugs and you name it in college. And that's not uncommon, right? I think we all know that that's not incredibly uncommon in the college world. But for me, I was so angry as a high school kid that I needed that positive outlet. And when I lost that and I only had kind of the negative outlets, it really just overtook my life. And so for me, coming back home and thinking about what could be my guiding light and what had impacted me in such an incredible way when I was younger, I wanted to get back to coaching too. I wanted, like, my dad was like, what do you actually want to do? Don't think about what you think you should do or what you need to do or what's going to give you kind of the tip of the cap from everybody else, especially in a town like Westfield where everybody's got an internship and goes to an Ivy League school and their parents are in finance and whatever. He's like, what do you actually want to do, man? And I was so fortunate to have that type of dad, that type of support that just leaned into me and said, go do what makes you happy. For me, that was coaching. And so I came back home, started coaching at the high school. I looked like a kid on the high school team still at 23 years old. I didn't look my age per se, but the kids really respected me because I could still hang, I could still run. I was up on the school record boards, you name it. And so I found what felt like home for the first time. Like home really felt like home for the first time when I came back to it, when I needed it most, when I was doing something that filled up my bucket in that way. And fortunately for me, and I don't want to gloss over this, I needed that feeling. I needed that foundation for what would kind of come up for me over the years to come. The first season that I was coaching, I lost my dad super suddenly. So the guy who pushed me to do what I was called to do, lost him super suddenly. Fast forward 9 months later, and life kind of continued to throw me some curveballs and certainly challenge me. And so we'll dive back into it a little bit more. But 9 months later, after I pushed forward, did my thing, showed up in a way that I was proud of, life really tested me and my family in a quite frankly, what felt like a much more serious way, in that we experienced a home fire in my childhood home. I was home. My mom was home. My little brother was home. And my little brother passed away in the home fire. And at that point, you've continued to push forward. You've continued to do what you think you're supposed to do. You've made it through a whole bunch of stuff. And then eventually you just kind of ask yourself, like, why? Like, what's the point? You can summon all of the motivation and inspiration and you can do all the things, but eventually you kind of just like tap out. And you're just like, really, what's the point in fighting through all of this stuff? And so hardest life of my year, or year of my life, I should say, by far. A lot of questions, a lot of doubt. Was fortunately still in a place doing the thing that I felt called to do. So here I was dealing with probably the biggest struggle in my life, to put it very lightly, biggest heartbreak of my life. And I had 16-year-old kids that I was coaching supporting me. I was really fortunate to be in the position that I was because I just had to walk this walk. I had to show up as I would hope, as I hope I could, and was able to get through that year. I did an Ironman as well at the culmination of that year, which was a major turning point for me too. And I felt like after a year, I kind of gave myself permission to live life again. And so I kind of went on this path of just showing up every single day, pushing the limits of what's possible, whether that was athletically, whether that was professionally, you name it. And now as I sit here today, to your intro, I'm the co-founder and CEO of probably one of the fastest growing group fitness concepts here in New Jersey. Have another concept called the Garage Gym. We've got 2 locations now. One of the founding, coaches on Ladder, which has 100,000 people on the platform program wide. Get to work with some incredible brands, get to have incredible conversations like this with people like yourself. Like, it's kind of surreal looking back on what the last 5 years has become. But I don't think that I would be in the position that I am without having gone through the hardships that I did go through, because I wouldn't have the perspective that I have. And so I'm not going to say I'm grateful for what I've, been through, because I think that would be putting it, it's not the right word for it, but I am fortunate to have the perspective that I have. And I wouldn't have it without having been through what I have been.
Yeah. It's interesting. You say co-founder, and I know you have other business partners, but from the outside, someone who's been following you and has heard your story, I think of your founding team and I see your dad and your brother on that team, right? Like I know that you would not be who you are today, and you wouldn't have built what you have built without them along your side and as part of this journey. Because the way that you've spoken about, that year and your own cycle of grief, and how authentic you were around, coping with it, and even your relationship with your mother, which we'll dive into a little bit. I know you have business partners, but I also think of that team as that extension, of your brother and your dad. How old were you that year?
So when my dad passed away, I was 24, and when my brother passed away, I was 25. So 6 and 7 years ago, which is crazy to think about. Sometimes it feels like a blink of an eye, and so other times it feels literally like a different lifetime. And I do think, for the last 15 years, every year feels like a new chapter, right? Every year feels radically different from the year before, and I think that's great. I think that's a testament to growth. It's a testament to having been through, a tremendous amount of hard things and whatnot. Some of them self-imposed, others certainly not. But I really appreciate you framing it that way, because I think my team is big, right? That
Yeah.
the founders of this story is not even
And
just
it's getting bigger and bigger.
yeah. If you're aware enough or self-aware enough, I think you can take inventory of how many people have truly impacted the trajectory of your life, whether it's, even Joe Rinaldi, for an example, right?
Yeah.
Like, a moment of time for 2 years where every single week we'd hop on, and those podcast episodes we would do were way more for us than they were for other people. We needed that connection. We needed that, the ability to talk with somebody about hard moments or things that we were dealing with. Right. And so Joe's a part of the team, right? Like, there's so many people like that who have had such impact, whether they know it or not. But I know it for sure, and I'm not naive to it.
Absolutely. In the months, year after the house fire, talk to me about your relationship with your mother. How you kind of probably had to step into a role you never had, foreseen coming. Talk about the evolution there. I talk about her help in shaping you and helping you build resolve over that year.
Yeah, so I'll bring it back to before that year, because I will be transparent in that our relationship didn't change from a dynamics perspective all too much, in that, there was a period of time where, my mom really struggled with her drinking. I really struggled with my drinking. And yet it's very hard to understand what anybody else is going through, right? I think something that I always talk about is that everybody's dealing with something. And it's so hard to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes to actually understand what that feels like for them, right? Our experience is our experience, our reality is our reality, our perspective is our perspective. But I think as you get older, or you start to know people better, you can at least start to appreciate what they're going through a little bit more. And So the reason that I mentioned I was so angry growing up in high school and even before then was just the dynamics that I had in my home were tough, right? A lot of fighting between my parents. My mom really had struggled with her drinking, and so fast forward into college, and that became my outlet, my need. It wasn't a want anymore; it was a need, just to fast forward through the day, just to numb myself from my depression, my anxiety, you name it. Like that was my solution, which obviously was not a positive one. Um, my mom ended up going up to get some help during that time. I was a fifth year senior, didn't graduate on time, um, barely graduated at all, quite frankly. But um, when she went to go get help, it gave me an opportunity to go see her in that environment, right? And hear people speak about what that experience actually feels like. And it felt like in that moment, hearing, a doctor at this rehab facility speak about what it feels like to deal with addiction, I went from, nodding my head, understanding like, okay, cool, got it. That makes sense to me a little bit more, to really relating to it in a massive way, to the point that I had to remove myself from the room, go catch my breath, calm myself down, and very, atypical to how I would typically respond to it. I actually pulled her aside, the woman who had been speaking, and I said, "Am I overreacting?" And she said, "If you leave here, it'll be the biggest mistake of your life." Now, granted, that was after 2 hours of us deep diving as to what was going on, but she just knew. She was like, "You need to be here." And so I had checked myself into rehab with my mom, which is like a scene out of a movie, and and we went through that experience together. But for the first time ever, I like really understood my mom as a person, right? Like not like son to mom, but like human to human. I just I felt like I understood her, and so coming out of that, one, I was so grateful for her having the courage to get the help she needed, because it allowed me to get the help that I needed. But there was just a level of appreciation, respect, that I think maybe you get later in life, but at a pretty young age, I really had for her. And then to experience the loss of my dad, who they were separated at the time, but like we experienced that together. We didn't go backwards, right? We just kept going forwards together. To experience the loss of my brother, um, to lose a brother is tragic, right? Heartbreaking. He was the reason that I was here doing what I was doing. I wanted to show him that we could keep pushing forward. But to lose a son, I can't imagine that pain. To be honest with you, I think it's definitely different. And to see her show up with the level of positivity and strength, and just every adjective that I can use to paint the picture of how she showed up, not without her heartbreak, not without the struggle of it, but just like the realness of it, and yet the ability to push through. She's a special person, right? Like without question, she's a special person. Not everybody could show up as she's shown up. And so my relationship with her was really just to be the rock when she needed it, and vice versa. And I'm, really, really grateful for that. And I think, going through all of the things that I've been through, it's, I tell the stories not for pity or what have you. It's, I spoke at an event the other week where I said, I appreciate what I've been through because it gives me an opportunity, which then feels like a responsibility, to share that perspective so that you don't have to go through what I've gone through to have that perspective now. Right. And so sharing our stories, I think when you've been through certain things that give you a certain perspective, allows other people to absorb that knowledge and to absorb that perspective themselves without having to deal with the trials and tribulations of losing a loved one, or what have you.
It's extremely powerful, and thank you for sharing that. Man, there's so many ways I can go with this, and one of the things that I want to get to is the crux of that period. There had to be at least a feeling of isolation at one point, right? You lost your dad, you lost your brother. Um, Even though your mom was there, she has her journey and you have your journey, and she lost a son, and you lost both a brother and a dad, and there's not many people that could relate to that, especially at that age. Um, can you talk about that feeling of loneliness and isolation, and maybe how that over the years turned into um, learning how to be alone and how to find power in those moments of being alone?
I think if I'm being honest, there was part of me that used that feeling of no one can relate, no one can understand what I'm going through as a little bit of a shield to feeling the feelings, right? I think it was way easier for me at that moment to put up some brick walls and just say, I'm going to just go do things rather than I'm going to go feel things. Right. And so I've always been that way where I can just put on the blinders and go do and it rather than feel feelings really hard. It's very uncomfortable. Right. But I always was applauded for doing the hard things that came very naturally to me. And quite frankly, I enjoyed working out, training, going and building a business, like all of the things that are praised on social media and what have you. Um, Putting myself out there, talking about what I'm feeling, but maybe not actually feeling it, right? Like everyone was like, this is so amazing, man. Like, good for you, like, incredible, good for you. You're so strong. And yet, looking back, not in the moment, but looking back on it, I can recognize how shallow I was living in terms of just checking the next box, going and doing the thing, what have you. And so there was a feeling of loneliness, but I think I used it to my advantage to go excel in other arenas in my life. And it wasn't until way later did and achieving a tremendous amount of, external success, if you will, that I looked back and said like, or looked within rather, and said, I probably need to make an adjustment to how I'm living and how I'm showing up. Um, and that was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done or that I continue to do now, right? Is actually like living life fully versus just going and doing the next thing because I'm capable of putting my head down and working through those moments of loneliness.
Were you, you're super vulnerable now and you open up and you share your story. I'm guessing you weren't always like this.
So bring it back, right? When my dad passed away, a few months later, right around Thanksgiving time, I launched my Instagram account, right? So Coach Sam Tooley was born in February of that following year. And it started as like a journal or a diary of my training, right? And it was funny because, again, how I described myself in college versus very short time after, here I am running around town in my booty shorts, documenting me training. But then it very quickly, to that point of a journal and a diary, became a place where I also spoke about what I was dealing with, right? And it I was only met with support, right? And everybody would just had my back. If people were judging me, they were doing it behind closed doors. I never felt that. And I didn't really care if they were. It really wasn't on my mind, right? What was on my mind is like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm going after. I wanted to coach endurance athletes around the world. I said, I'm going to, my excuse for the Instagram account was I'm going to build a business off of it and coach endurance athletes. And I think, the doubters or the critics, right? The haters, they get silenced by success very quickly, at least in your own mind, right? You can, if you're putting yourself out there and it's not working, right? You're very much more likely to listen to the haters, the doubters, the critics, whatever, because it's like, man, like this isn't working. Like, is this weird? Like, should I be doing this? But when you like grow the account and you're gaining clients and you're starting to make money and people are telling you to go and you're getting brand deals, like that's powerful. That's, rocket fuel on the mission. And so, I pressed forward and I opened my first studio, right? Like I signed the lease to my first studio. Everyone's like, dude, you're opening a gym like less than a year later than all of this happening. Like, good for you. And so, I think for me, it was just like I was applauded for that vulnerability, but it was kind of surface level vulnerability. It was me acknowledging my thoughts and articulating my feelings, but again, just not actually feeling them, And it was, I don't want to say it was for show or for anything else. It was real, but I don't think I really let anybody in. I was letting myself out, but I wasn't letting anybody in, and it wasn't, hasn't been. It's only been as of recent, I would say, over the last like 2 years, right? So 5 years of brick wall, no nothing, just work, 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 train, train, train. Make some great friends, build some great relationships, but I don't think it's been for outside of the last maybe 2 years. The 5-year mark of losing my brother for whatever reason was a really transformative moment for me, similar to when I did my first Ironman on the 1 year anniversary of him passing. There's been these moments, right? These milestones that have allowed me to take a step back and then make a shift mentally and then in how I'm living my life uh, that are tangible.
Did you ever, outside of your experience in rehab, was therapy ever a part of your process?
2 years ago, I said to myself, I'm going to start going out. I'm going to start having a good time again. I'm going to start dating. And I would say I opened up a tremendous amount of can of worms by doing that. And very quickly, I realized your boy's got some work to do and on himself. And there's no way I'm going to be a good partner to anybody, myself included, if I don't deep dive on some of this. So I went to traditional therapy. I worked with our boy Nick Pags a little bit. I went back to normal therapy, right? And so that's been a part of my toolkit now. The journaling has always been a foundation, right? Putting pen to paper, my thoughts down, getting really clear as to and my journaling prompts are pretty funny. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but they start with me venting about what's going on. I work through it. And by the end of it, I'm hyping myself up. And that's every time that I journal. It's like, what's going on? What's wrong? Whatever. From there, I work through it. And then by the end, I'm like, you got this. Like, you're totally fine. You're a badass. And so, I think the journaling with meditation, therapy, I now have an arsenal of things that I can call on when I know I'm feeling some type of way. And I just have to be disciplined enough to call myself on my bullshit and go do the work that I know I need to do.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why my go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a really big takeaway for the audience here, right? Because not only have I had a lot of guests from the New Jersey area, but I have had a lot of guests who, at one point lived in the New Jersey area. And, I think you're a pretty humble dude, but Sam Tooley is equivalent with the fitness scene in in the state of New Jersey. And I think that this is a really, really good, takeaway for people because like you said on the outside, when it came to your external success, it happened pretty fast. And a person who doesn't really know you is looking at you and is probably thinking, this guy's just got it all figured out. I think, in the few interactions that we've had, everything's been positive. But one thing that stood out to me was the fact that you understand you're a continual work in progress. And then when I learned the story and when I learned the details of your story, I started to kind of take note of your interaction with your community and the interaction you've had with people like Joe, for instance. And hearing you open up about the fact that as you kind of now explore this new era of your life where you're dating and you're building more or deeper interpersonal relationships, you realize that unless you quote unquote work out within, it's going to impact those relationships externally. And so I hope that's a good takeaway for the listeners out there, because a lot of times you see people like Sam build what they've built, but in order for them to keep going, they need to continue maintaining what's within, and they need to continue growing what's within in order to get to those levels that we don't see perhaps on social media. And so thank you for sharing all that. I know we covered a lot in like the last 30 minutes, and I want to make sure that at least from a timeline perspective, is there anything leading to your brother's passing in the home fire that you want to touch on just for detail purposes that we should kind of make note of before we kind of pivot to what you've been building?
Honestly, I feel like that covers it for the most part. I think, there were moments within that process, right? That time frame where, I think when my dad passed away, my whole mission, my whole purpose was to show my brother that we could prevail, right? We could still go live life. Like this wasn't going to stop us in our tracks. I certainly wasn't going to go backwards, what have you. And then, over the course of the year post, losing Jake, um, I really did I leaned into what I knew worked, right? And so I think, again, when you think about bringing this to whoever's listening in terms of like, let's say you're listening to this and you're struggling. Maybe it's not to the depth or the magnitude of losing your brother or you losing your dad, but let's just say you're struggling. Because when you're struggling, that's your whole world, right? It doesn't matter the significance to anybody else, but if there's something that's on your mind that you're struggling with, whether it's like just anxiousness or depression or what have you, and again, I've experienced those as well. Not overcomplicating it and just leaning into what works is a step forward in and of itself, right? And I think sometimes we're looking for the magic wand for something different, right? We just feel like there has to be like the perfect answer, but I don't ever think that comes. And even as I sit here today, right, like there is stuff that I'm absolutely struggling with, and we can get to that too. But as you bite off more, right, and success finds you or you find success and you work for it, like new problems will arise and new stressors will come, new doubts, new reservations, new anxieties, what have you. Like to your point about everybody being a work in progress, or at least me certainly being one, is like that's an absolute fact in my life. And I think as if you get naive to that and think, oh, once I do this, I'm going to be good, or once I have X, Y, and Z, everything's going to be perfect. Like, who are you fooling? You know what I mean? Like, that's just so ridiculous. That's never been the case. And that if you look back, right? Where you were at a certain point, you said, if I did this, I'll be good. Or if I do this, everything will be perfect. Like, absolutely not. So the quicker that you realize that and just say, every week I need to take inventory. Every week, you know, every day is a new opportunity to just press the reset button and say, like, what do I need to do today to feel good and be successful and find those positive outlets, what have you. When I did speak the other week, I talked about the question, right? And I think questions are really important. And the question that I've been asking myself lately is, what's holding you back? Right? This question of what's holding you back. And if you can get into the practice of every single week asking yourself what's holding you back and then actually do the work, right? The hard work, the deep work, the personal work to move beyond that. Maybe it's a hard conversation, maybe it's cutting out a bad habit, maybe it's making a small adjustment. Like if you ask the hard questions and you're honest with yourself and then you go do the real work, that's a recipe for success, or at least moving beyond whatever you're dealing with in that moment. And so for me, 5 years ago, losing my brother, answering that question, I don't even know if I would have asked that question, right? I don't know if I would have been honest enough with myself to say, well, this is what's actually holding you back. And I just did what I felt like I needed to do. But as you go beyond that, I think asking those really important, hard questions and being real with yourself is a catalyst to really improving your life and feeling a hell of a lot better.
It's a good call out. And I think, for the listeners, there's a lot of high performers that have come on this show, and I think that even myself, I strive to be the highest performer in every aspect of my life to the best of my ability, whether it's fatherhood, being a husband, whether it's running, whatever you take it. But one of the misconceptions out there is that as a high performer or someone with a high performance mentality, we don't encounter obstacles. But the truth is that, and I see this, and you said it pretty eloquently, that once you hit a certain point, you're just unleashing a new series of obstacles. Like if obstacles are removed, then I don't think there's credence to calling someone a high performer, because a high performer always needs something to strive for. And so, I want to make sure that we kind of touch on that, because it's important. I think in everything that you've done, you've displayed high performance to a T. But if you go back to that year, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you go back to that year, I can't imagine you envisioned for yourself what you have today. Even if you were manifesting some sort of success, I'm sure you didn't anticipate, the level of success that you're at right now. And that kind of leads me to like my next question, around any sort of imposter syndrome you perhaps face, especially in those earlier years.
Yeah. So I'll be honest with you, right? As I first started, again, I was only met with support, and I really didn't have that much going on, right? So there wasn't an imposter syndrome because I didn't even know who I was. I wasn't interested in, I wasn't really interested in what anybody else thought either. I was just doing my thing, and I was really enjoying it. I just took steps forward into a life that, at that time too, felt like a dream job. I was coaching at the high school. I got hired as the youngest head track coach in the state of New Jersey at 24 years old. And it was just like life was good, right? I was coaching endurance athletes online. I was building my brand. I opened my first gym. Like I moved that first gym into a bigger facility, but like I just kept doing little improvement. And even when we opened our first Alpha Fit Club, uh, it just felt like another step forward, and it felt like the right step. It felt like I was pretty prepared to take it on, and I also had this mindset of like, well, who cares if you fail? I refused to fail, but it was like, what's the worst that happened? And that perspective of there's much bigger issues or much bigger, potential problems in life than, something not working out in terms of like a business or what have you. Like I just was like 110% in, 110 miles an hour. And what's the worst that happens? Even if this thing crashes, like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, just go for it. Who cares? So I was really fortunate to genuinely move that way because it allowed me to go fast and it allowed me to go far. We opened our first Alpha Fit Club. 9 months into opening our first Alpha Fit Club here in my hometown, we had like 400 members, and the pandemic hit. And you're like, oh shit, okay, like this is a wrench in the plan. But you felt bad for yourself for a day. You got back up and you said, well, what are we going to do next? I would bring a boombox into the middle of the town. I would bring my whiteboard that's literally sitting next to me here in the office, and I would carry it above my head into town, and I'd lead a workout for 150 people on the street of my hometown. And it was just like, I was just doing, and it felt like maybe it's because I was in like my small suburban town, but I'm like, no one can keep up with this energy, and I'm just going to keep bringing it. Right. So it wasn't me against the world, but I just knew what I had. And it was a lot of energy, a lot of juice, a good perspective that was actually helping propel me forward rather than hold me back. It was helping me contextualize what mattered, what didn't matter, all of those things. Where I will say, without question, is, and it was to the point of, as you ask for more, you're met with more, as we started to franchise out our concept. So we had first location, second location, third location, all, doing really, really well. Post pandemic, we were like the only group fitness brand, it felt like, in the state of New Jersey that was pushing forward at the pace we were pushing forward. We sold 20 franchises within the first year before we ever opened one, because people saw how we worked. They saw the product, they felt the experience, they saw what it could do for people. And so again, everybody's like, yo, keep going. This is awesome. Do your thing. And then as we started to open our first franchises, very quickly, I realized how unprepared we were to be franchisors and to build this business at the pace and scale we were. Um, and there was a lot of pushback from, franchise partners and what have you, being like, do you know what you're doing? Like, this doesn't like, and for the first time ever in my entire life, my entire career, that I have someone opposing me essentially and pushing back on me. And so there was a real moment of prolonged doubt, being like, is this, do I know what I'm doing? Because you have so
Well,
many
I
people
mean,
hyping
the
you up.
truth is, like, you never did this before.
Yeah. And so looking back, the answer was like, no, but we're going to figure it out. And that was really the only answer that I could give myself. Right. But people wanted assurance. They wanted, reliability. They wanted the path paved. Right. And I think there was a little bit of naivety on my part going into it. I thought we did have it on lock, and we got this. We've done it 3 times. Like, of course we know what we're doing. And then there was maybe a little bit of naivety on other people's parts, saying like, how could you assume that we do know how to franchise something? We've never done it. Right. So that initial few months of going through that process, where I tried to teach other people what was so intuitive to me, there was absolutely a very prolonged period of imposter syndrome. And then fortunately, I kept the mindset of we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. And match that with the work behind it, that now looking back, again, 13 locations later, hopefully 20 by the end of the year, open with thousands of members all over the state. You walk through the airport at Newark Airport and somebody's got an Alpha Fit Club logo on their hoodie, and you're like, and they're like, yep. And you don't know them. They go to a different studio, but that's pretty wild. But there was moments of doubt for sure.
This reminds me during COVID, you signed yourself up for what, a 50-mile run or 60-mile run, right?
100.
And it was a 100-mile run. Jeez, I forgot. I knew it was an ultra.
Yeah.
And you only made it 50 or 60 miles?
Made it 65, 100K instead of 100 miles.
That's right. Okay. So the reason I went there was, you talked about your perspective around failure. And what people, I think sometimes undermine is the fact that that's a superpower, right? When you have gone through tragedy, right? And tragedy puts perspective on what's important, you realize how much is not important, right? You realize that failures in business are not important relative to what you had suffered through. When you see either your own life on the line or you experience the loss of loved ones, you realize that none of it really matters, right? And so who cares if some money is lost? Who cares if you let stakeholders down, of course unintentionally, right? Like that stuff is all, it's possible to there's a possibility of overcoming it. And I think, and I truly believe that's a superpower that has carried you through to where you are today. And even, the mindset when you were running that ultra, I remember because you were messaging us through that, right?
Yeah.
If you want to set the stage for, the audience, just give them a little bit of glimpse of what happened that year.
Yeah, I mean, so New York City Marathon was canceled that year, and I was coaching, the Wallaco Run team. I was coaching 50, clients privately that were training for, everything under the sun. World shuts down. I'm thinking to myself two things. I'm like, one, well, what the hell am I going to train for? And two, how am I going to keep everybody else inspired? We also usually held a 5K in my brother's memory called the Night of Lights 5K, and we did it in my hometown in the park. We'd light up the park with first responder vehicles, you name it. And it was special. But, I said, we got to put something on here. So I tapped my buddy Kieran, who's my business partner on the garage gym, one of my best friends. I said, he had been an ultra runner, right? He had done these races. I said, I think I could do this. Now, granted, I didn't train for it at all, right? Like I did a couple runs. I hurt my foot in the process. I was training, but for 5Ks, right? And so marathon, I was like, okay, marathon doesn't excite people though. It's not inspiring. Are people really going to donate if I run a marathon? Maybe, but what's something that scares me? And I said, 100 miles, man. I mean, that's serious, but it's also kind of badass. So we went out on the day that New York City Marathon would have been held. And we raised a bunch of money from people donating, saying well, if you hit X, I'll give you Y. And if you hit Y, I'll give you Z. And it was the nastiest day ever. Pissing rain. I have the most epic photos. It looks so bad. It's black and white, you name it. People would come out, they'd run miles with us, but we said, we're going to run for 24 hours, right? And my goal in 24 hours was 100 miles. So, or it was, we're going to run 100 miles, but the time cap is 24 hours. So we go out. My first marathon within the block was 3:40, and I'm literally run a marathon in 3:40, and everyone's like, slow down, dude, chill. And I'm like, I feel good, man. I'm just going. And I would every hour I would check in on Instagram, and I still have the video on my old phone where I saved the entire stories from the day. So we get to 44, and I remember running around. There's a slight incline, and I'm with a bunch of buddies at that point, a bunch of the coaches from the gym, and I'm fired up, legit, yelling as we come up the thing, being let's go. I feel good. 44 miles in, hit 55, and both of my feet collapsed on me. Both the arches on my feet couldn't support me anymore. So the next 10 miles took me 4 hours. It took me a ridiculous amount of time. So I get to 12 hours. My grandpa, who's 85 years old, comes out, does the last 2 laps with me. It's pitch black. It's the middle of the night. It's 10 o'clock or whatever. Rain's coming down. And I was so disappointed with myself because I felt like I was quitting. And it was the first time that I actually ever felt over the course of that period that I couldn't complete the task that I had set out to do. Everything else, I was always able to like finish strong, crush it. My half Ironman, I excelled at. You name it. Really, I hadn't put a goal on the calendar that I wasn't able to go do. Open the gym, hit X, Y, and Z, grow the business to this point, finish this competition, win this competition. And here I was physically incapable of finishing what I set out to do. And I remember I felt like heartbroken, um, going through that moment. But then you took a step back afterwards, and I was like, you gave that every ounce of power in your body. And it turned out that I had like double stress fractures in my feet by the time I was done. And so like here I am like running with broken feet, David Goggins style, and I'm certainly no David Goggins with no training, no nothing. And I was actually so proud of myself for putting myself in a position that I probably wasn't prepared for, gave it everything I got, failed. And then to your point about perspective, I'm like, well, who actually cares? No one cares, Sam, that like you didn't run 100 miles. Like no one actually gives a shit. They're in awe of the fact that you ran 65 with two broken feet. Like let's contextualize this thing. So I think there was a moment of sadness, a moment of acknowledgement and realization. And to your point, it's just an added feather to the cap of perspective there to be like, you know what, like good for you.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, coming out of that, no one came out of it thinking there's no way Sam could run 100 miles. Sam could definitely run 100 miles. Like today may not have been his day, but he can run 100 miles. I think he's proven to all of us that it can be done. And so,
I have
yeah.
no interest in running 100 miles, though. Let's put that on. No one come to me. No one hit me up. I pass. I'm good. I'll stick in my
uh,
house.
I actually recently had on these two girls who ran from Memorial Sloan Kettering to Montauk, 130 miles. And they fired me up. I mean, like I'm thinking about doing it now. So,
It's perfect. It's perfect
yeah,
for you, not for
yeah.
me. Don't hit me up.
But as I kind of think about like what inspired me to even consider doing it was, you know, they were great. I mean, they were great and they were super inspiring. But they were doing it more so for the cause. They're also a lot younger than me, like 10 to 15 years younger than me. I look at you and I look at what you had gone through, and I think again about how the foundation of your fortitude, resilience, and what continues to push you to kind of take on hard things, like that fires me up because just kind of seeing and your perspective around it too, how you handled calling it quits with two fractures, right? Like that is very, don't sell yourself short. That is literally David Goggins. And so that really truly inspires me, and kind of gives me the fire to even think about doing something like that down the road. um, as we kind of wrap things up here, I want to make sure that the audience has a glimpse into what you're up to now. You had talked about both your personal life and business. If there's anything that we should kind of take away from where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, definitely two different ways to go to answer this question. I'm sure a bunch of different ways. I think first and foremost, and honestly, I have to say thank you to you for having this conversation with me because I don't as often go down memory lane and like talk about this as much as I used to. I think so much of who I was and like like my personality was predicated on my story, right? And what I had been through because it was all consuming, and it was such a big part of my life. So, I've moved beyond that, I think, to my benefit, but also to my detriment, because, having this conversation with you is a great reminder to me, um, about, all of those chapters of my life, why so much of what I do now is important to me. And again, like when I said, there's certain things that I'm struggling with now, I think having things to call on, like those memories and like, why I started in the first place is powerful. Right. And so I think for anybody listening, like if you've been through some stuff or you're dealing with some stuff, like you can call back on the root of why you started in the first place, as rocket power, right? As fuel. So I appreciate this conversation for that reason. And I think as we build our business bigger and bigger on the Alpha Fit Club side of things, on the garage gym, on ladder, you name it, as we take on more projects, I think we're super fortunate, but it does come with new stress and new anxiety and new doubts and what have you. Bringing it back to why I started coaching in the first place was, coming out of that rehab facility, I had felt so lost, so hopeless, so broken, so purposeless, you name it. That was brought up again by losing my dad, losing my brother, what have you. But I wanted to help people believe in themselves and make sure that they didn't feel how I felt. And so the root cause of why I wanted to coach, when my dad said, "Dude, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to coach." It was predicated around helping people understand that they are capable of so much more than maybe they even know. And for me, fitness has always been a catalyst for that, right? Showing up every day, putting in the training, doing the hard work for that 1 hour reminds you of what you're capable of. And then preparing over the course of weeks, months, years to go excel at a race or what have you is a process in and of itself that reminds you of the same thing and shows you that's what's possible. Whether it was my first Ironman where I didn't know how to swim, didn't know how to bike, of course could run, but like putting it all together on the day, I was scared shitless. So I overtrained, did my thing and crushed it on the day, and I've gone on to do some pretty amazing things physically, but, and that's great. But the discipline and what I've learned going through that process has transcended itself into how I carry myself every day. And I watch that in the gyms, right? I see people who we get to impact every single day at Alpha Fit Club, at the garage. They show up and we remind them, or we show them for the very first time, what's possible if they do the work and they lean into those moments. And then you see them carry themselves very differently outside the confines of the gym. And to me, that's real impact, right? We're changing the fabric and the DNA of the communities that we open in, because that's the mission, right? That's how we coach. And, people can talk about training modalities and this and that, and like what gym's best. But like, I think at the core of it, if you're there for the right reasons, that seeps through. And that's why people talk about what we do in such high regard, because we're there for the right reasons and the mission is pure. And so, I'm hoping, right, that we can take Alpha Fit Club specifically and build it, into a national brand, because it's less about the workout, even though that's fantastic, but it's more about us reminding you of what's possible and showing you what you're capable of and paving the way. And so, I'm excited about that. And I think that, calling on that mission, that purpose allows you to push past any of the self-limiting beliefs that you may have of, are you capable? Is it worth it? What have you? It's worth it. Right. And reminding ourselves of that is important. And then the other side of the question, right, in terms of, relationships and what have you, like I'm super fortunate to now be dating my girlfriend for 2 years. And I think she would agree. Like
There you
your
go.
boy has some work.
He's lighting up.
Yeah,
He's
but
lighting up
like,
a little bit.
but well, I more so mean she would agree that your boy
Yeah.
had some work to do to
Yeah.
get, to be 2 years into a relationship. But I think I'm fortunate that I found somebody who made it worth it to do that work and, open myself up to what living life fully means and can feel like, again, because I think super easy to shut yourself off from that because it's easier. Quite frankly, it's 100% easier, in my opinion, to live life closed off from other people and just focus on you and just go do. It's been easier for me, right? But it's not as fulfilling. It's not as impactful. It's not as full of a life as when you take your guard down, let somebody in, do the work to be the more complete person that you can be if you do so. And so now, again, when you talk about perspective, I talk to other people differently. I see things differently. I recognize there's a whole lot more to other people's lives than just the work that they're doing or the races that they're running, right? So I think, living life on that mission and living life a little bit more fully, that paired together has been the secret sauce for me and, gets me excited about what's to come.
Absolutely. You talk about Alpha Fit Club, right? And I think it's incredibly powerful that it's a brand, to your point, that doesn't literally just instill physical strength, but has instilled, a mental foundation. And I think, that's what keeps people coming back, essentially. And that's why that's why you're so synonymous with the fitness scene right now in the New Jersey area, and for
Yep.
sure to come
We're coming, baby.
in the broader region.
Yeah.
And so Thank you for that. And thank you for letting us in on your personal life, because again, people don't see that. Right. I know you've given glimpses on Instagram, and I know you've opened up a little bit on social media now, especially over the last 2 years, to your point. But again, people look at someone such as yourself and they just assume he's got it figured out. Of course he's got a girlfriend. Of course he's
I
happy.
don't think I don't think anybody has it figured out, man. If everybody's got
It's
it
true.
figured out,
That's the thing, is no one does.
yeah.
No one does. But hearing the vulnerability from a leader in the fitness space, and someone who, again, who literally uses his platform to instill that fortitude in others, the presumption is there. And so just hearing you tell us is awesome. As we wrap things up here, my last question for you is: you've learned a lot about yourself over the last several years, right? Especially in the face of adversity and tragedy. If you kind of think about your lifetime ahead now, what other layers are there to potentially reveal, or what is it that you'd like to further kind of uncover about yourself and your potential, whether it be in your personal life or professionally?
So I think for me, one of the questions, again, to go back to like important questions, has always just been like, what's possible? What's actually possible if you put yourself out there, right? And I think to my earlier point, it was just like chip away at what felt right next, and kind of just grow very gradually, what have you. But the question is like, am I dreaming big enough, right? Am I thinking of the impact that I can have in a big enough way? Or am I just doing what's comfortable and what comes next and what makes sense and what feels like the next logical move? Or am I not thinking big enough? And so I think for me, it's being willing to put myself out there to actually dream massive, right? And go big, not for the sake of more, but just bigger impact, and kind of, again, drilling back to that mission of like, I know what we're doing has impact, and I know what we're doing is creating change within the communities that we're going into. And like, I feel like with that opportunity, because that opportunity is 100% there, right? We've got to seize it. But with that opportunity comes a responsibility to go see it through. And I think about, what would make my dad proud? What would make my brother proud? What would make my mom proud? The people that have already bet on me proud. Like, I want to make other people proud that they've had my back, they've bet on me. And then I want to make myself proud, right? There's no better feeling than putting your head down at the end of the night and knowing like you gave it everything you got, whether it's reflecting back on like the 100 miles the next day and being like, you know what, man, like you gave it everything that you got. You couldn't have done anything differently. I want to look back on life that way and say like, I gave it everything that I had, and that the mission that I was on was worth pursuing. And I think that's the layer that I want to pull back, is just like, what's possible? What am I capable of if I just actually go for it? And I'm willing to put myself out there at that level. That's the layer that needs to be pulled back a little bit more.
Beautifully stated, my friend. Sam, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for opening up, for sharing with us, for, leaving nothing off the table, and for just giving us, insight into how you've instilled strength, not only within yourself, but within others around you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to know you. And I'm grateful for the community that you've built and that you're continuing to nurture.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
You got it, brother.